The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We welcome to this week's show Republican candidate for United States Congress House of Representatives in the 7th Congressional District, Lisa Scheller. In 2020, Lisa had won the Republican primary for that seat and lost to Democratic Congresswoman Susan Wild by a slim margin, 2%. Some background on Lisa. She originally hails from Tamaqua, Pennsylvania, and is a granddaughter of immigrants. Her great-grandparents, who came to this country from Poland and Eastern Europe, were the first Schellers to come to America. The family eventually moved from Tamaqua to the Lehigh Valley in the Allentown area. Lisa's family built a small family business into what would eventually become a large manufacturing company called Silberline, which is run by Lisa, who is president and CEO. Lisa also has a career in public service, as she was elected Lehigh County Commissioner. In her 2 terms in office, she helped lower taxes for the residents of Lehigh County to the tune of $41 million. She also created a commission to handle all union collective bargaining to take the politics out of it. Lisa has also provided substantial support to both educational and environmental organizations. She was recently honored in 2021 as the Conservationist of the Year by the Lehigh Valley Ducks Unlimited chapter, and was also named Distinguished Citizen of the Year by her Regional Council of Boy Scouts of America. She has founded a nonprofit called Hope and Coffee, which is a coffee shop and meeting place that brings people recovering from alcohol and drug addiction back into the job market. Lisa lives in Allentown and has 2 grown children. Educationally, she has a master's degree in engineering from Lehigh University after having completed her undergraduate studies in Colorado. We look forward to talking to her today about her candidacy and the issues and why she's running, and she feels very strongly about these issues. And we'll talk about some of what confronts America as we move forward.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Lisa, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Oh, thank you, Chuck. Thank you for having me today. I'm really pleased to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. Before we get into some of your background and all that for our audience, I followed your race a couple years ago. You're in, I believe it was the 7th Congressional District.
Yes.
Take us through your family history so people know a little bit about your background and who you are.
Well, thank you. So, I am the granddaughter of Jewish immigrants who came to America more than 100 years ago. They came from Poland, Romania, and Austria. And you're right, they came here legally. They were oppressed where they were living, and they came here seeking the American dream. And that really comes down to the crux of why I've decided to run for Congress. What they call the American dream is basically what I view it as. It is personal liberty, equality of opportunity, and like a trust in the wisdom of the common person. And they came actually to the New York area. Ultimately, I think my grandfather wound up in Louisville, Kentucky, and working for Reynolds as a research director. But his American dream was to start a manufacturing company. And he did that. He did that in 1945 in Stamford, Connecticut, in a factory that probably was smaller than this studio right here. And it grew, and in 1963, they outgrew where they needed to be. And at that point, I was actually alive, but I was 4 years old, and they wanted to move to a place where they could provide jobs and help people that didn't have jobs. Tamaqua, Pennsylvania, Lansford, Pennsylvania, the Schuylkill County was in a severe recession. There was a lot of joblessness, unemployment was high. And so at age 4, we moved to the coal region of Pennsylvania. So I grew up in Tamaqua, Pennsylvania, and I had a very, very nice childhood. It wasn't perfect. Right. I definitely was the victim of some anti-Semitism in school, being the only Jewish family for a long time, and then a second Jewish family moved into the neighborhood. But it was more based on, I think, ignorance of people not understanding. It wasn't a deep-seated thing. Sure. But I know the sting of it. Right. So it has affected my opinions today and some of with what's going on in the world today, sure, as it affects Israel. Anyway, grew up in Tamaqua, entrenched in the family business. Somewhere along the way, I lost my way. I became involved in drugs and in alcohol. I became addicted, and through a progression of addiction over the course of probably 5 or 6, 7 years, I found myself actually addicted to heroin. Wow. At age 22. I was emotionally, physically, financially, and spiritually bankrupt. But for the grace of God and strong parents who had taught me some really good values that I've now, really integrated into myself, I found myself in treatment. And again, by the grace of God, today I will be, on April 1st, I will have 41 years being in sobriety, of continuous sobriety.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
And of all drugs and alcohol addictions, and they're all obviously serious, most people I've talked to and physicians would say heroin is the top of the list. The hold physiologically, as you said, mentally and spiritually, heroin of all the drugs is probably the most serious of the opioids. So,
well, I would argue that today fentanyl is.
Oh, there's no fentanyl.
We'll talk about it a little later when we talk about the southern border and what is going on. Right. So, I got into treatment, kind of got again, I had to embrace recovery, and then I wasn't supposed to talk about it anymore. It was a skeleton in the closet. So let's forget about that ever happened, that chapter of my life. So the first place I went was a trade school. So I understand the value of trade schools. I learned computer programming in a trade school in Pennsylvania, and I went on to get a job working actually on government contracts with the development of Doppler weather radar. And anyone who watches the news and the weather today, those systems are still in place. Right. Ultimately, I went on to get a college degree in mathematics, and then I came back to Pennsylvania. I was out of Pennsylvania just for a couple of years, moved to the Lehigh Valley in 1987, and I've been living in Lehigh County ever since. I came back to work at my family's business, first doing computer programming, putting in our networks, putting in our enterprise systems, things like that. And then in 1997, after graduating Lehigh with a degree in engineering, I became vice president, and I was working with my brother, and 8 months later he died in 1997. And then I became president, and I have been in a leadership role ever since with Silverline, and we have been growing ever since then.
Right. The company, as you just said, the company is Silverline. It is a manufacturing company. Mm-hmm. It provides components for paint and things like that.
Exactly. Metallic pigments for paints. Today we have over 160 employees in Pennsylvania. We export our products all over the world. And I'm really, really proud of what Made in America means. During the course of this whole time, I got married. I have 2 beautiful children. I am not married now, but I have 2 beautiful children. They are adults. They're a daughter and a son, 30. My daughter's 28. Zari, and my son is 30 years old, Leo. They both have left the area, and that's unfortunate. That's one of the things we need to make sure, because Pennsylvania exports our children, and I would love to have my children here in Pennsylvania with me. And that's one of the problems with having not a business-friendly climate here in Pennsylvania. I also, in 2010, I got involved in politics in 2008 as a committee member, grassroots effort, right, knocking on doors, petitions, putting signs out, making phone calls. And in 2010, there was a tax increase in Lehigh County.
Now, you were a Lehigh County commissioner, correct?
That's when I ran for Lehigh County Commission.
Yes.
I was
and won. You were
I
elected.
won. I won. I ran and I won. And for 2 years of the 4, I was chair of the Board of Commissioners, and we did some things I was very proud of. I ran on a platform of fiscal conservatism and transparency. And every year we had a tax cut or a rebate. And in doing that, we saved residents and businesses nearly $50 million without cutting a single service.
Wow.
And there were some other things that we did, like we reversed a law. We took away the ability for the county executive to negotiate with the unions so that a single elected official was having full negotiation authority with the unions. And that set it up for the unions elect the executive who does the negotiation and put it back in the hands of a bipartisan committee of the commissioners, therefore making it much more fair and better for the taxpayers and people living in the county.
So you're a kind of a hybrid, if I'll use that word, Lisa, and somewhat rare in the sense that you have mixed executive experience and I hesitate to say family business because it's much larger than that, but a family business.
It is a family business.
It is a family business. And, something I used to, when I ran for governor a long time ago, and in other offices I've run for senator. But the thing about that, I used to make a big part of my pitch, as I'm sure you do. Look, I create jobs. I sign paychecks. I provide health care for employees. Unless you've really been in the marketplace and competed and been successful and dealt with competition and signed paychecks, how do you really know? And so that's part of your message, I assume.
Absolutely. As a job creator, as someone who signs the front and the back of a paycheck, as someone who said, and I am very, very proud, of the jobs that we have offered thousands of Pennsylvanians during the course of, being here in Pennsylvania. And I'm very proud to be here in Pennsylvania. You do learn about economics. You learn about what is causing I know what's causing the supply chain shortages. It's, the actions that the administration is taking, shutting things down, making people paying people to stay at home instead of coming to work. I've had, issues like that where I can't run because I don't have people to work. Right. And so that causes these expansions, and the supply chain shortages in the automotive industry, which is my biggest market, has absolutely affected my business because all of a sudden I don't have, my customers are not buying product from me because they can't get chips and they're not making cars. Right. And then prices go up. There's no cars. I've talked to an auto dealer. I have friends who are auto dealers, and they're saying our lots are empty. We don't have cars. So prices are going up on new cars, and prices on used cars are going up very high right now. But because of the demand, and the same thing is happening to people all across the country. Inflation is a tax on those who can least afford it. Gasoline prices up more than 50%. Heating oil, food, you name it. These are necessities. People on fixed incomes have to make decisions. Are we going to heat our home or are we going to buy food? And so
heat or eat.
Heat or eat. Yes, exactly. So in creating jobs and creating good manufacturing jobs, I know what drives our economy. So that is my plan as a congressperson, is to create an environment where our economy can grow. And these are things that I would be legislating for, and I have like 5 points. Okay. And it is low taxes. And we see what happened with the 2017 tax reform, which was a very good start. We saw people getting raises, we saw people getting bonuses, employment was up. 2 years ago, we had the highest level of employment in our country for every single demographic.
In 70 years.
In 70 years. Okay, and a lot of that's driven by creating that environment. Low taxes, reasonable regulations, not all kinds of red tape. Let people start businesses. Let people have their American dream. And the government overreach into our communities and into our businesses prevents us from hiring people, prevents people from achieving that. You can't start a business when the government's picking winners and losers. So reasonable regulations, good infrastructure. The last infrastructure bill was 10% infrastructure and 90% socialist wish list.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a slush fund for Pete Buttigieg to fund Democratic progressive projects is what it was. But go ahead.
We need bridges, we need roads, we need rail, we need airports, we need seaports. We do need broadband across our country.
Of course.
Okay. And we need to make sure that these are there so that for all Americans and for our businesses. So those are the top three things, not the top three, but three. The other two relate to the workforce and the community. And that would be, we need to have safe neighborhoods. So defunding the police and the crime spree that's going on in Philadelphia right now, in all of our Democrat-run cities. Larry Krasner, he's not prosecuting criminals.
And letting them out. The
Yeah,
ones that
and
are
letting
already
them
there.
out. And every single day you hear about, the crime rate is definitely related to criminals not being prosecuted. So we need safe communities. As a person who backs the blue, as they say, I have respect for our law enforcement officers. They need to have the equipment, the training, and the resources necessary to keep our families and our neighborhoods safe.
We're going to come back after these messages, and when we do, we're going to talk about two things. We're going to start with the border and immigration, and then we're going to get into the opioid crisis and the fentanyl crisis this country faces. And that should conclude the end of our show. So we'll be back in a few moments. Thanks. As many of you know, I'm a big fan of George Will, the Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist of the Washington Post. He did a column recently eviscerating the progressive Democrats' involuntary and uncontrollable impulse for more and bigger government and mandates. Mr. Will writes in his article about their obsessiveness in finding any excuse through government regulation for the minute supervision of life's activities. For example, he refers to Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg's recent speech, in which he says, and I'm quoting, "0 is the only acceptable number of deaths on our roadways." Of course, Mr. Will points out that unless you are going to ban all vehicles from going faster than 5 miles per hour, or ban vehicles altogether, the Secretary has set a goal that is ridiculous and unattainable. And then there's Anthony Fauci, who thinks that in the future there should be vaccination requirements for all air travel and masking on all flights forever. I'm now going to quote directly from Mr. Will's editorial. Begin quote. "Americans by the many millions are ignoring government supervision. And that sound you hear today is the clicking of progressivism's ratchet. Having a carbon footprint, taking a shower, eating cheeseburgers, and whatever affects others, so it should be regulated. The phrase 0 tolerance of a virus or violence or something is favored by people, progressives, who are allergic to making judgments and distinctions, i.e., thinking, putting masks on 5-year-olds, teaching them that life is more hazardous than it really is, and to regard other human beings as vectors of disease, like biting insects, is not an optional arrow progressives should feel free to pluck from their quiver. Remember the jest, progressives do not care what people do as long as it's mandatory. There must, however, be limits to prophylactic measures against even clear and present dangers. As happened during Prohibition, increasing swaths of the nation are ignoring efficiousness that is not plausibly related to proportionate public good, and that is clearly related to social bossiness. When Buttigieg identifies as the only acceptable social outcome something that is unattainable, we see how government forfeits public's trust. Americans are hitting the mute button on government that calls life's elemental realities and painful trade-offs unacceptable. Again, we are here today with Lisa Scheller, the candidate for Congresswoman in the 7th Congressional District. She is running in the Republican primary coming up in May. And Lisa, we covered a lot of ground in that first part. And you were kind of finishing up, before we get into immigration, your final point, education. Take it from there.
Yeah, so education was the fifth part of what I went on to legislate for. And it has to be a quality education so that people have the ability to live that American dream, so that we are training people. Doesn't have to be a 4-year college degree where people come out with $150,000 in debt. It can be a trade school like I actually started with. So one of the things that I did, because my parents taught me to always become part of the solution, about 20 years ago, I started a partnership with Lehigh Carbon Community College, and I created an endowment with them, working with them to educate the most disadvantaged folks in our community in the Lehigh Valley. That endowment has now grown into one of the largest private endowments for a community college in the entire country, and it's providing a quality education for the most disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged folks in the Lehigh Valley. Quality education leads to a quality job so that these young adults can achieve their American dream.
Wonderful. And I congratulate you on being so proactive in providing community service. Okay, let's talk about, you feel very strongly about what's gone on and is going on at the border, the ghost planes that are distributing apparently illegal immigrants up to northeastern Pennsylvania and central Pennsylvania, and immigration generally. So take it.
So we know more than 2 million people have come across the border illegally in the past year. And we don't know who they are. We don't know if they have been if they have COVID, or if they've been vaccinated, if they are criminals, if they are terrorists. There's drug trafficking, and there's fentanyl trafficking. Right. So to put it short, one of the first prerogatives I would have as a congressperson would be to secure the border and make sure that illegal immigration stops, and that we ban sanctuary cities from receiving federal funding. Fentanyl. Well, first, my grandparents were immigrants. We need immigration. We need legal immigration. Right. The American dream should be here for people to come and partake of, as my grandparents did. But people need to come here legally, and then they get to embrace all that American dream has.
And let me interject there. That's an important point, Lisa, because somehow in the debate or the arguments over immigration, when you say you're for, border walls and legal immigration, they twist that, the progressives twist that into, oh, you're anti-immigration and some of these people are suffering, they're seeking asylum. How did your grandparents get here? Of course, mine came the same way as yours, immigration. Mm-hmm. That's not, it's disingenuous and spurious argument to suggest that. The issue is coming legally, going through proper channels. We're a country of laws and a constitution. And all people that support a strong immigration policy want is for those people to go through the same thing your great-grandparents and my grandparents and great-grandparents went through. So, but go ahead. That's an important point.
I absolutely agree with you. But I think one of the biggest crises is the fentanyl crisis in America. 1 in 3,000 people, I believe, has died of a drug overdose. Drug overdose today is the #1 cause of death among 18 to 45-year-olds. Wow. And enough fentanyl has come across our border to kill every man, woman, and child in this country more than 5 times over. And as you might think, it's very, very personal to me. In 2018, after being anonymous for more than 36 years, like I said, we never talked about it in the family, I decided, as I watched the opioid epidemic unfurl, I had to do something. My parents told me become part of the solution. So I broke my anonymity against the advice of my parents, and I founded a coffee shop, a 501c3 that employs addicts in early recovery to help end the stigma of being in recovery and help folks get back into the workforce living productive, sober lives. And the model has been a success. And a second coffee shop is opening in Fargo, North Dakota, under the same model. And a third we have plans for. So I'm really excited to have become part of the solution there. Fentanyl coming through our border. The problem starts at the border, but it ends with heartbreak in families, and it ends with loss in families. And literally the American dream of hundreds of thousands of families is literally being killed by fentanyl coming through our border. We need to close our border. We need tougher penalties on criminals who are smuggling fentanyl in, because it is literally destroying a generation here in America.
Is it fair to say, and I don't pretend to have all this knowledge on the drug fentanyl, and then I'd like you to kind of explain it. What I've read and gathered from fentanyl, it kind of is like heroin. but it's obviously synthetic and is produced so cheaply that it's affordable for everybody. And lastly, it is 5 to 10 times or even more in certain cases more powerful than heroin, which is why people that are on heroin, they want to go with a cheaper alternative, fentanyl, using dosages. They're approximating it's the same thing, except no, it's 4 to 5 times stronger. A lot of people don't realize that overdose, but please talk about that.
You know, even people who are buying something off the internet, they take 1 dose and they die. 1 kilo would kill, I'm going to say 1 pound, I think, would kill 200, is enough for 227 million doses, something like that. So it's very, very powerful. But besides that, we need to make sure that we close our border. Because I want people to be able to live that American dream. And it's a crisis here. It's a very huge crisis here.
I did a View. Now, I don't know if this has changed. The View was 2 or 3 years ago, that we were getting millions and millions of fentanyl pills being shipped from China using the United States Postal Service. Can you imagine?
True. That is true.
Yeah. But at any rate, we have about 2 or 3 minutes left, Lisa. So talk about why you're running for Congress and
So, I mean, I probably should have said this up front. Right. The reason I am running for Congress, I look at my life. I've lived the American dream. I've absolutely lived the American dream. I got a second chance at life and I lived the American dream. And I'm running for Congress to protect that American dream and to stop the Democrats from turning it into a socialist nightmare. Mm-hmm. And that is what's going on with Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Susan Wild right now. They are over-regulating us. They are taking away our equality of opportunity and our personal liberty through regulations, and they're marching us down a road to socialism and worse. So I am running to protect that for all Americans and for future generations. I have to thank I know where my rights come from. My unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they come from God.
Right.
Our founders got it right, but men, women, their families served, sacrificed, and died so that I could have freedom. And I take that very personally. And
veterans is important to you.
Veterans are very important to me. And in fact, I have lived a blessed life, and my parents said give back, whether it was education, recovery. Now I'm looking, and I've already started, veterans. I am committing 100% of my congressional salary to charities that benefit veterans that live in my district. Because you know what? I just can't understand why we have veterans living under bridges while we are flying illegal immigrants into our communities at taxpayer expense.
And not telling anybody.
It incenses me. It just incenses me. So I've already put together the committee. We're starting now. I said, why wait? Right. Why wait? I'm a person who walks the talk. I stand up for what I stand for, and I stand for the Constitution. I stand for personal liberty. I stand for the American dream, and I know that I want to serve. The only reason I'm doing this is because I love this country, and I want to make sure that that American dream is alive for future generations.
That was as a former trial lawyer, that was a wonderful closing statement. You closed very well, Lisa. Thank you for joining us on the Volpe Report today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wish you a lot of luck in your campaign. Again, today we were here with Lisa Scheller, a candidate for the Republican nomination first for the 7th Congressional District. Talk about real quick, what areas is that district? It's up here kind of in the
So the district currently is Lehigh County, Northampton County, and a little piece of Monroe. The race is toss-up and even right now. The district will grow. It'll become more favorable for Republicans. I know I can win this race. I absolutely know it. And I also know that I am the only candidate that can defeat Susan Wild. Right. She is on my target list. Every day I wake up, I wonder what will move the needle closer after I say my prayers. What is going to move the needle closer to winning this race in November and taking back the House for Republicans?
Well stated again. You heard that right from the horse's mouth.
Thank you.
we'll be back next week with another guest at 10:30. Thanks for joining us.
Every week, Chuck Volpe shares his perspective on Pennsylvania issues in the news and on your mind. From new laws being introduced in Harrisburg and Washington to government spending and even local controversies, hear how they affect us in Northeast and Central Pennsylvania. Catch Volpe's Views every Tuesday on the Fox 56 News, first at 10.